Okay, so what I wanted to do today was take a look at a topic that has been quite prominent, not only on my own YouTube comment section, but with a few people online and a few places online as well, regarding the difficulty of the Resident Evil 4 remake. Pretty much what I've seen is a lot of people come to my YouTube comments or kind of speak about online saying they've come from the original game and they've played everything in the original game, they've done professional, they've done certain runs, speed runs, whatever, and even found standard in the remake to be a bit more of a challenge, especially in certain areas, but as a whole it just seems to be a bit more difficult. I gotta be honest, in some ways I do definitely agree. My first run through of the remake was done on hardcore, and I do definitely feel that there was some parts in the game where I really struggled. To name a few, the water room first time through, as always, it was a bit tough. The Salazar boss fight really got me stressed out, and that was hard. The part with the wrecking ball with Ashley for the first time really got me, and the section where you're escorted by Mike through a complete horde of Granados non-stop. It is not easy, and there are some other parts in the game that are also difficult, but they're the ones that really got to me, especially on the first time run. I think there's definitely a few factors that do weigh into the fact that it does feel like a harder game, and I do want to go over those today. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I guess first and foremost, take your mind back to the original game and how it played. So just to kind of summarise it briefly, you couldn't move and shoot, you couldn't parry a thing with your knife, there was no stealth, and there was no crafting system. Oh, and you also could reload while moving as well. So it kind of required you to be more tactical on your positioning rather than anything else. And I think that has a massive impact on how the game plays around you. So the AI, obviously in the remake they're a bit more kind of aggressive, but in the original you had to kind of move away from them and they would come to you, because you wouldn't be moving away from them and shooting. You would have to kind of get into a spot where you're safe and keep there until they got too close to you. In this game they're chasing you non-stop, and they can do plenty more things that they can't do in the original game. I think one thing that pushes you to move around in RE4 Remake compared to the original is you can get grabbed from behind, and you have to get a button press to get out of that, and it does potentially lead into a pretty substantial amount of damage coming your way if you do not get out of it in time, and that obviously does increase per difficulty. I actually think a big factor to the difficulty of the remake is purely just the aggression of the AI. I again did hardcore run the first time through, and it feels like they're constantly attacking you, they're constantly throwing things, trying to grab you. There's more different types of enemies around, so you've got the normal Granados, you've got the ones that have obviously mutated and they're there too, ranged enemies later on, dogs, bugs. They throw everything into the mix at certain parts of the game, and it really does get a lot more intense because you've got to deal with so many different variants of enemy. Resident Evil 4 was never short of multiple types of enemy to deal with, and it seems like, especially in the later game for the remake, they do throw a lot of those types of enemies into the same room at once, and it really does shake things up. On top of that, obviously you've got the knife in the remake, and you can parry pretty much again anything that happens to you outside of certain attacks from bosses and such, and that does really encourage the enemy to hit you more. And again, the higher difficulty, the more frequent they attack, and then the more frequent they attack and the more you parry, the faster your knife gets weighed down and breaks. So it is kind of a double-edged sword with the parrying. It does help and it does save your life, but eventually you're not going to be able to do it, or you're going to be very restricted to when you can do it. Another couple kind of factors I think weigh into it a little bit, and this might be me making it up, but it definitely seems like it's the case. One I know for sure is that the higher the difficulty is, the more enemies get spawned in. So for example, on standard, after you beat Salazar you go down to the boat to get to the island. There is no enemies. If you do on hardcore, about halfway down to the boat, 2 knights are there. So they're definitely throwing more enemies at you on harder difficulties, and the knights are a pain in the ass in this version of the game. And another thing, I think there's definitely more enemies in combat zones than there used to be. Other combat zones in the original game were a lot more compact, I think, but even in the bigger open zones in this game, there definitely seems like a lot more going on, and a lot more enemies to deal with. And on top of that, I think the boss fights, Resident Evil isn't really known for its boss fights being too difficult. I definitely think they've improved them in this game. They're definitely a lot more tough to deal with. Again, Salazar in the original game, you could literally stand in one spot and never get hit by him once, but in this game you can't do that. There's a cheese which I did on stream a couple days ago, but if you're trying to do it normally, it is a tough fight. And even Sadler, if you don't have a rocket launcher or you're not trying to do it in any kind of cheesy way, it is a tough fight. So the bosses are definitely an improvement and do kind of lay onto the difficulty even more so. And the final note really is that I had new encounters in new areas that aren't in the original, and they've changed areas that are. Again, I kind of throw it back to that wrecking ball section with Ashley. That is in a very small compact room in the original game, and there's like a couple brutes in there and a bunch of enemies, but in this one, it's a large space, it takes a while, and it throws a lot of enemies at you fairly quickly. So again, harder difficulties, that's even more challenging. So I definitely think the difficulty isn't a bad thing. I actually really like that it's hard, even on standard. But again, it might sway people's decisions on playing through on harder difficulties normally, or using kind of bonus weapons or cheese weapons to get through. But it's definitely an interesting topic. I always think there should be a level of difficulty in these games that is difficult to, it's difficult to kind of go in straight away and do it easily. Like, there should always be a really challenging difficulty, and it definitely has that in this game, which is good. But at the same time, again, you've got people from the original that are saying, I've played the original game God knows how many times, I've played it on professional God knows how many times, and even on standard, I am struggling. But that is more of a perspective thing. I think standard is pretty easy, but that's just me. I played through on hardcore the first time through, so naturally, doing it again on standard, it did feel a bit easier, but that's just from my perspective. But it differs from person to person, really. But that's pretty much going to do it from me. Do let me know what you guys think of the difficulty. Have you played it through on professional or hardcore yet? Are you struggling on standard, maybe? Let me know your thoughts on the difficulty of the game down below. As always, thank you all for coming by. Remember to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more Resident Evil content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.